Hi, I'm Hentyle Yapp. I'm here with an office hours installations for NYU Skirball, and I'm here with.
Hi, Kyle Abraham.
So I feel very lucky to be here today. I've been a huge fan of your work for some time now.
Thanks.
It really is quite amazing, and I'm really happy that Skirball is bringing live the Realest MC. So I thought we just kind of start off with what kind of came about, like what informed the work. You know, it seems like it's sort of the Bildungsroman, coming of age, Pinocchio, real person, realness, like all these sort of concepts. So I was just curious if you want to sort of introduce the general piece and like how it kind of came about for you.
Sure. I think in some ways, Live the Realest MC was influenced by an earlier work that I made as a solo called Inventing Pookie Jenkins. The subject matter and themes are somewhat similar. For Inventing Pookie Jenkins, I am wearing this kind of floor-length tutu and dancing to Dizzy Rascal's Respect Me. And for me, it had a lot to do with this kind of feeling in the high school and like kind of later middle school years to just try and put on this like bravado that wasn't really part of who I am or was, to kind of either go unnoticed or to kind of just feel like I could be viewed more like a real man, in the same way that in this version of the Pinocchio story, kind of putting on this kind of queer hip-hop lens to be kind of viewed as a real man. Something that I used to do was I would be in my visual art classes, which were one of the only classes that I had where it was kind of gen ed, everybody was kind of mixed together. I think people kind of started kind of like accepting me because I could recite rap lyrics to different artists that I liked. Like, oh, okay, all right, J. Ruth DeManjo, okay. Just like stuff like that. And it kind of started to create this kind of shift for me in the way that I interacted with people, and kind of gained acceptance from some of the students in the school.
So when you mean by people, do you mean like specifically folks in the Black community? Do you see sort of larger public in general? Or just...
Sure, yeah, definitely people in the Black community, in my community in particular, but anyone that, I think because I was a Black student in certain kind of accelerated courses, there weren't many people that looked like me in those classes. But beyond that, the way that I spoke seemed to Black folks that I wanted to be white, and to white folks that I was gay, without ever having the conversation about my identity or anything like that. So I had to deal with all that since I was a little kid. That was always the reality. I'd always be in these classes with maybe one other Black student, maybe two, and have these kind of similar conversations that we would have when we're on the outside in things like gym or art classes or what have you. So this definitely is a work that is in a lot of ways trying to kind of create a kind of character of myself to blend in with my community, with the Black community in particular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess part of asking that question is to think about how your work both has sort of engages questions of intraracial as opposed to interracial dynamics, and how that kind of built around certain gender norms that are also racialized in that kind of way. So that's actually it's a helpful sort of purview into thinking through the piece. So I'm actually now curious about the process. So it seems as if it like grew from a solo and then it's a company piece. So how has that like sort of general formal artistic process worked for you in terms of thinking from the solo form into the company form?
Yeah, it's really tricky. I think there was even a period where this work was even a solo version. I used to, for the early years, like with the radio show from 2010 and then into Live the Realest MC, I made solo versions of both of these shows. I only did the solo version of Live probably once at the Time-Based Arts Festival, TBA Festival in Portland, Oregon. But other than that, it's been this group version, which I think grew in a lot of different crazy ways. There was a period of time where we had a residency at Wesleyan University to build out this work, but my father passed away the day that I was supposed to leave to go to the residency. I still had to go because I had to speak and do all this stuff, so it was a really weird time. But my dancers, as amazing collaborators, they took part in the residency without me. I would call in and speak to one of my former dancers, Rochelle Raffalides, and I'd say things to Rochelle about just giving her word association to develop movement, and that's how some of the phrases in the work were built. And a lot of other structural things came about throughout time, even adding one dancer, because initially it was really just, there were only 2 men in the work. But I felt like it needed more of a certain type of energy that a guy who was dancing in the company and other works could really help bring, especially for some of the humor that I was interested in.
It's interesting to think about the formal process of kind of the words into movement. Is that sort of a common process that you've used, or?
I've used it in some works. Ideally, I like to switch some things up. Ironically, the thing that was a major breakthrough for me choreographically wasn't employed in Live the Realest MC. So it's actually it's one of the only works from 2009 to 2019 that I didn't really videotape myself moving at all. Actually, no, I did. Yay, good, I can take that away. I remember now. There's a mic solo that Karate in the company now does, but the initial dancer, Elise, I videotaped myself doing that. And the same thing with now CJ when he's doing this solo in this, what we consider the second act. That also was videotaped. Maybe those are the only things. But at least there is something, so I can say there's been this through line.
Yeah. I'm also curious how the piece now resonates with you. Like, so if you're saying 2009 and then you had the premiere in 2011 as the final piece.
2011. Yeah.
And then now 2019. I'm also thinking about I think the rapid changes that have happened since then, right? So like the era of Obama into in terms of like 2008. And then sort of Black Lives Matter really coming into sort of a larger public discourse. I mean, it's always been there in some ways. So it's like 2012, 2013, and then obviously the sort of different presidency that we're under now. So I'm curious if in terms of like the social political context, of how you sort of see the work situated, or if it feels kind of in its re-performance, does it feel a little different now or not?
Doesn't necessarily feel different for me as the maker, because the themes that I'm addressing are still themes that we've been fighting for well over the last 10 years. So hopefully, I think we're trying to get to a place where we can feel certain types of progress. I do think there has been some progress in terms of inclusion with regards to like a fight for something, but that's not necessarily even new. I think maybe there's just a little bit more visibility for people who didn't feel seen, but there's still a long way to go. But I don't know. I hope that people are seeing this work all these years later and still connecting with it in some way or finding it valid. I mean, I'm really grateful that Jay asked us to come and present this work, because we started thinking about putting it back into the repertory primarily because of the microphone solo that Karate's doing in the show now. We did it for a fundraising event, and my agent really liked it. I was like, we can throw that back in. So we started remounting the work, but not doing it in a city like New York, which has a really critical audience. So I was really nervous, and still am really nervous about the New York audience and the way they perceive and receive something that is older, especially coming after things that have created more visibility towards me and the company. If new audiences are coming to the work after seeing maybe something like a piece I made for New York City Ballet, how are they then going to look at this work I made from 2011? It's not new, but it's new to some. I think it's probably in some ways a response in my mind to a review that came of a work that I made, premiered in 2017, that had already been performed in New York in 2017, but had a kind of return in 2018, just weeks after the piece I made for the ballet. So a critic was looking at the work from 2017 without actually realizing that it's something that came before this ballet. So it's a curious thing to think about the ways people think about progression of work and one's artistic voice.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the I mean, you don't have to divulge if you don't want to, but what are some of the paranoias that you sort of feel around revisiting a piece from 2011 into today, considering, you know, you've had a really successful career and it's
all subjective.
It is, and I appreciate your humility, but, you know, in sort of standard measures of the art world, I mean, you've done quite well, and you've also crossed so many boundaries, especially the New York City Ballet work, you know, continuing to really push Alvin Ailey's repertoire. There's just so much that you've kind of been able to accomplish in the past few years. So I actually was really interested in like revisiting the 2011. Like, what is that? How does that? I mean, you're kind of touching upon it, but I'm curious, are there particular themes that you feel that are really helpful for right now, or that feel good to revisit in a certain way?
I don't know. It's just really, it is all scary. I don't know.
It's just the condition of being an artist.
Yeah, but it's also, you know, generally if I'm reading a critique, I'm reading it well after it's come out, and I'm reading it in a point where I can actually look reflectively and say, okay, what could I have changed, or what is the lens that this critique is coming from, and how does that possibly apply to a revisiting of a work. I generally read them when I'm already sad, because I'm like, if it's bad news, I'm not going to feel any worse, and if it's good news, it's not going to make me feel better. I'm just a downer of a person anyway, so if I'm in that state, I can just look at it and be like, oh, that's really nice, let me grab some tissue and cry some more. So I think there's something about reading some of the critiques that came out of 2011 that made me really reconsider certain things. I think maybe because I was in it before, it wasn't as easy to look at the trajectory of other characters, really other than myself. So it was exciting to have an opportunity to kind of dive more into that and have my collaborators be so willing to be open to changes and learning these new little nuanced things. And it's humbling also to try and give all of the feedback that I have to give on the work that I used to perform. It's a lot easier to give notes generally to the company on like dance phrases, but when it's the text that I wrote or these little things that I was playing with as a performer, I've never really been in that space to have to try and give that information, and it's really humbling.
It's like when the performer becomes the archive,
right?
And there's also so many questions around. I mean, you know, as a professor, I get older and my students stay the same age, and I always imagine my friends who are choreographers, as you get older, the dancers, that the body of dancers that you generally have around you, they stay kind of in that same age category, right? Yeah. So it's always like it's a funny kind of, I imagine, relationship around remembrance, things that you've created for your own body, and then how to manage that relationship when you become the archive in some ways.
Yeah, and what is necessary? You know, I think there's certain things that I was doing in my version that movement things that had a kind of virtuosity for me that were kind of unnecessary. It's like, I just did this move because it was cool. So I'm like, let's actually find a better solution here. And I think that that's happened in a couple places where we found a better way into storytelling than just doing some crazy move.
I'm also curious then how that sort of translates for you now that you've been doing a little more teaching, right? Like how, like what is now as you sort of, the shift in terms of thinking about how you become a kind of archive, a living archive for the work that you've been creating, the body of work, but also when you think about pedagogy, like how is there a relationship there that you can think of, and or like how do you sort of see differences in how you were moving as a younger dancer, and then now that you're in a different role in relationship to producing future dancers?
Sure, yeah, I think it's probably much more rooted in patience and confidence. I've seen the ways in which my students can be super receptive to really obnoxious, minuscule feedback that it can kind of like take their mind spinning in an exciting way. And so I realized that I actually have something to offer in a way that I think I was always so intimidated by my dancers, because I'm like, oh my god, they're so amazing, there's things that they can do that I can't do, They're younger than me. So I think now I'm at this place through my teaching that I feel much more confident in what I have to say, and much more patient towards the time it may take to take some of that feedback and transition, and also the reality that just actually physicalizing notes and change take time, even if someone picks up quickly. To make some of those transfers in the body and emotionally, it can take a little bit of time.
Yeah, so I'm curious, what are some of those things that you feel more confident in now, in terms of teaching to students?
Well, I feel like my dancers now are more, even if maybe they were before, but I didn't feel confident enough to give them finite feedback. I didn't feel as if they either wanted to hear it or that it was necessary. But now I find the value in all of those things, and I see these things, and before maybe I just would say, oh, whatever, they'll fix it on their own. And maybe they would, but maybe it's also nice to hear it from me, and to know that, like, it's actually important for me to say something to each dancer. There's some in the past that I'd say, oh, whatever, I'm sure they'll be fine on their own, and let me just go and talk to this person. But it's great for me to at least acknowledge everyone in some way. I definitely could do better at it, but I tend to, in the company model, try and focus on the thing that I think really needs more attention than something else. And unintentionally so, I tend to forget that everyone needs to be seen.
That is very true. So I'm curious, maybe if we could switch a little bit and maybe give a sense of people online, whoever's watching this. Hey, just what brought you into dance? Like, I know you grew up in Pittsburgh, correct? And you went to like a arts high school and
half day, and only my senior year.
Your senior year. So I'm curious, just what's your emergent story in terms of dance?
Sure, yeah. I grew up going to a lot of house parties and hip hop parties, and was a big rave kid. My parents...
I was too.
Oh, yeah, my people. My parents... my mother took me to get a fake ID so I could go and see Delight at the Metropole. And yeah, it was my favorite group. You can hear their music in the playlist for the show. Or on Spotify, because I posted on Spotify. But, yeah, and I used that ID to go to, like, the youth night at... It sounds really weird to say the youth night at the gay bar, because that just... for so many reasons, just sounds terrible. But there was Tuesdays and Thursdays. So in high school, I would go to the gay bar and just dance all night until like 2 o'clock in the morning. Didn't drink then, don't drink now. But we just danced. Me and my friends just danced all night. And I started getting interested in studying dance primarily after seeing the Joffrey Ballet perform this work called Billboards, which was all to Prince's music. Huge Prince fan, and was like, okay, they're doing something to Prince. I don't know what it's going to be, but I'll go and see it. And it really pushed me over the edge in a good way. I think from elementary school to middle school, I went to look at a performing arts middle school to go to one for dance, but I didn't see anyone dancing the day I went there. They were just kind of running around the school, and I was like, no, this isn't for me. And then similarly, I went again in high school, from middle school to high school, to consider it for high school, and again, everybody was running around, and the boys were chasing the girls in her tights, and the girls were like slowly stopping to be chased, and I was like, this is ridiculous, let me just get out of here. But then having the opportunity to take a dance class, the teachers there told me that I should go half day at least to the performing arts school, so that way I could still do my academics at my main school and then work on the dancing in the afternoon.
And then after high school, you were at SUNY Purchase? Or?
Yes, it kind of skips a year. I went first to Morgan State in Baltimore. They told me they had a dance program, which they did not. They had one dance class that was Intro to Modern Dance. They also told me to get me to go there, that there would be a van to take me to classes at schools like Towson State or Goucher or something, and there wasn't. So luckily I met this woman, Stephanie Powell, and I went to her classes twice a week on Wednesday nights and Saturday mornings. So it was meeting her and then meeting some dancers that were at Towson that came to Morgan to dance in their dance club. And I would follow those dancers around. Darrell Moultrie, who's actually a choreographer making a lot of amazing work today, and Latricia Harper, who was at Towson as well. The two of them, I kind of follow around. And Darrell kind of got me to consider auditioning for Purchase. And he's still one of my closest friends, but I think a lot of that had to do with dancers from companies like Bill T. Jones or all these other companies who were listed in the alumni sheet at Purchase. That got me to go to Purchase.
And then, since we are at NYU,
we're Tisch.
Then you got to Tisch.
Yes.
Tisch.
4 years later, after I graduated Purchase, 4 years later, I danced around very briefly for like a year after college, and then quit dancing for several years. And my return to grad school and to NYU was to figure out what my relationship to dance could be or should be, and even to New York City.
Yeah. So what drew you back into dance? I mean, because the reasons to not do dance are quite numerous. You make no money. It's painful to your body. Nobody understands what you're doing. Like, it's a bad idea. I mean, I did it, and I make bad choices. So it's consistent with my bad choice making. But then what brought you back? Like, why go back to it? What was the call for you?
Well,
because I think a lot of people struggle with that question, when they really hit that point of, do I stay in this or not? Like, I think that's always it's an interesting thing to hear what draws people back in.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think when I was trying to figure it out the first time, I was dating someone, we were living in Pittsburgh, and we were both going to move to London together. He was going to Goldsmith, and I was going to go to La Bonne to figure out my relationship to dance. And to be in London, which is like a dream. And when I got to the school, they weren't going to allow me to take that many of the dance classes because I was going to focus solely on choreography. And it was just kind of frustrating. I'm like, well, I'm in this program, and I really want to be moving. And I wasn't even allowed to work with the students there. As a maker, you had to find students on the outside. And I just started getting really frustrated with that. And I dropped out of the school for other reasons too. I dropped out of the school and stayed in London, and I'd take class with random people around the city and applied to NYU and just was like, let me just try this out again and see what this is going to be like. And I just kept at it. There, of course, were a lot of frustrations along the way and a lot of humbling things that would happen along the way. But it's kind of like dance is, I don't know, this kind of voice in the back that's always pushing you to go forward, or it's this thing that, like, when you're crying in your room and you just start moving, it's still there, it's accessible. Or even when you have an injury like I have right now, I can still dance, I can still do something expressive with my body. So it's just something that's never left me, even if I tried to leave it for a period of time.
And did you always know you wanted to be primarily a choreographer?
Yes.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, even as a little kid, I wanted to be a choreographer. I wanted to be a choreographer and a fashion designer.
So
I'm only doing one of those
So
things.
what's the draw of, what was the draw to choreography for you? Or what has it been?
I have no idea. I think I just I loved organizing bodies. I loved dancing myself and learning more about movement. And I love music. I grew up playing music and just loving music for so long that I think in some ways it was to be all the more expressive. Yeah, I mean, the thing about studying dance versus continuing studying any of these other art forms that I was working on or practicing, it was the only thing I couldn't really fully do in my room. I could sit down and play my cello in my room. I could paint in my room, but I couldn't really move that much.
I'm actually really curious now. Who are some of your biggest dance influences, and then who are some of your non-dance influences? I know you've collaborated with Glenn Ligon, and you've worked with Karen May Weems, all these wonderful people, and so your relationship to playing cello. I mean, you're an artist in that larger sense of the word, not just like a choreographer. So I'm curious, what are some of like the biggest influences for you from the dance world, but also outside of it?
There are so many. Faye Driscoll's show, by the time this comes out, maybe her show will be that week. in Montclair, so I'm going to go see Faye Driscoll. I love Faye. I just was texting with Camille A. Brown last night. I mentioned Bill T already. Ralph Lemon is kind of like my artistic god in every way.
Yeah.
I mean, it drives him crazy when I say that kind of stuff. He's like, oh, okay, but I look up to him so much. B.B. Miller. I love Trisha Brown. Some of the folks that have passed on: Trisha Brown, Merce Cunningham, Martha Graham. Ishmael Houston Jones, I love what he's done for dance and for kind of just kind of like being really exploratory with another body as well in different ways. And even thinking about his show Them, and it's kind of remounting over the years. When I first saw it, it actually influenced some ideas that I was playing with in this piece. Clearly not as strong as in Them, but it definitely affected the way I looked at how the men could interact with each other.
It's funny. I just did the remounting this past summer.
Ah.
So you're right. It's a complete crossover. It's great. And then what about non-dance influences?
Oh, right. Yeah, there's so many. Well, you named Glenn, you named Carrie Mae, Lorna Simpson, Adam Pendleton and I were texting a little while ago. Theaster Gates and his whole kind of crew, the monks, everybody are just so inspiring. Even him just thinking about the music side of it. I was just listening to a podcast with her, the singer and musician who I really love, and Prince has always been a huge influence. Yeah, I mean, they go on and on. Of course, you can't be from Pittsburgh and not think about August Wilson, but in the same way I would think about Baldwin or Langston Hughes. There's just so many authors and people in theater, Terrell McCraney, whose work has such an impact. I could probably go on and on. It would take a lot of editing to get through my long list.
That's great. And I'm actually really curious about how has been being in LA part-time. I mean, are you in LA most of the time or part-time? Or?
Well, at the moment, I don't know. Every year I'm trying a different model. This past year I tried just being there in the winter. So I don't really
so you're
know.
Not here in the winter.
Not here in the winter, no. Yeah, I know I'm always there in the winter. Everything else is, malleable in some way. I'm trying to figure out what the best model is for me, and maybe that'll keep shifting. But I think that might wind up being the thing, at least for the next few years, of just being there in the winter and being here the other time, if not on tour. But we'll see.
Yeah, it's really interesting just to see so many dance choreographers have that kind of relationship to the university, in terms of a lot, there was kind of the big wave of everyone getting an MFA so that, they could teach, but then also figuring out these kind of, you're still creating work well outside the university context, but then still kind of working within that context in terms of training and stuff like that. So it's just like an interesting shift, and it's more and more common just to kind of hear that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's nice for my dancers and for me to have a little bit of that space. And my students are so inspiring that, I come back and I'm recharged in a lot of ways.
Have you had time to kind of get a sense of the LA dance scene, or has it been just so busy in terms of the teaching stuff?
No, I tried. This year I didn't try to. But I especially when I first moved there in 2016. I lived there for the full year in 2016. And so that year in particular, and some of the years previous, I was dating someone in LA for a good number, more than a couple of years, and trying to just really check out the city as best I could. But I think once that ended, I don't know, I kind of separated a bit from the community as well. Still trying to find time to see things, but also just find time to just recharge. It's a really curious city. It's different than New York in the way that what I found in my last 3 years of this back and forth is that at the dance shows that I go to, the community is a little bit more broad. You actually are seeing people from totally different walks of life at a show, and people coming from different boroughs to come to a show. In LA, it's really accepted to say, oh, that show is on the east side, but I live on the west side. I'm not going to make it, and it's accepted. It's kind of like,
well,
well,
when I
that's
used to
fine.
live in LA, if I were trying to date, if I lived on the east side and were trying to date someone on the west side, that would be considered long distance.
Yeah, exactly.
So I understand the distance, not to excuse it, but you're
No,
right.
but
In
it's
terms
so
of the
different.
transport, I mean, it's a different sense of space in that sort of way.
But it's accepted.
Yeah.
And it's kind of strange because it's like 45 minutes to an hour, but to get from like Lincoln Center to BAM could maybe take you 45 minutes.
Yeah.
You know? And standing up in close proximity to people who may not be aware of their space and may sneeze without covering their mouth. Like all of that you have to deal with, and it's the same length of time. And if I'm in my car, I can play my music, I can control the temperature.
I get it.
Yeah, it's really bizarre that you're like, oh no, I'm not gonna make it, and it's like, it's fine.
Great. Well, I know that you also need to get ready
little
for your
show
performance,
today, yeah.
but so maybe we'll end with one last question,
Sure.
which is like, what are you most excited about coming up for you? What are some of is there a project or set of projects you're really excited to be working on?
There are so many, and it's tricky because some you can't really announce.
Oh, okay, yeah, so that
There's
you
things-
can have on the interwebs.
Yeah, there's things I can announce, but I can't say when they're happening. The next big work I'm making for the company premieres in 2020.
Great.
And I'm working with Titus Gaffar and Micheline Thomas designing the scenic design. And it's all set to D'Angelo music, which is really fun. I can't wait for people to see it.
Wow.
The dancers look so dope. They just look amazing. And yeah, and I'm making a new solo for myself, which is really exciting. It's all going to be performed by an a cappella choir, which is really exciting.
Wow.
But I can't. Well, I guess I can say that'll be in the fall. But the piece for my company won't be until 2020. So you got some time.
Are you rehearsing here or in LA or where do you?
Everywhere really.
Yeah.
I have a residency with Lincoln Center Education.
Mm-hmm.
So ideally, I'll start rehearsing there more. But other than that, I use a lot of the resources around the city. But I really love working with my dancers out of New York whenever possible. That way, people aren't so stuck on ending at 6 o'clock and they're really, really present.
Yeah. Here. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm so
Thank
glad
you.
that we could chat.
Yeah.
And
Thanks,
Merit with tonight and the next few nights. And it's such a pleasure to meet you. And congratulations on everything you've been doing and will continue to do.
Thanks for that support, that vote of confidence.